David, we're not able to see a ton during fall practices, about 20 minutes of drills in the first two practices each day. But one of the things we saw was Vanderbilt transfer. Jadis Richard had an interception on the first day, picked off Tyler Van Dyke on going against the defense on that half field 3-on-3 work. Dave, and a lot of buzz. Jadis, wasn't a huge name coming from Vanderbilt. People were wondering, especially now, where is he going to fit in with the secondary, with the cornerbacks? I want to talk about the cornerbacks in this position. It's an intriguing battle. They could be switching things around, but you've got some new faces in there. You lose Tyreek Stevenson and DJ Ivey, and now you've got kind of these guys like Richard in here. Jaden Davis is another guy from OU. They've got other guys as well. We saw Davonte Brown in the spring, but with Jadis in particular, where do you kind of see him fitting in with this team?
Yeah, so I think, first off, yeah, he definitely flashed day one of practice, so that was encouraging. He also gets your attention with his length and his body type. He's 6'2", 200, definitely looks like it. You're standing next to Davonte at one point during that first practice, and he's maybe an inch shorter than Davonte, and Davonte's really long. So Miami has some long corners to work with. I would put Jadis on the outside. I know last year at Vanderbilt, he primarily played as a big nickel in the slot. I just think 6'2", 200, and I get it from a physicality standpoint. You'd want that guy as a big nickel closer to the line of scrimmage to help in that regard. From a coverage standpoint, though, I think it's tough for those guys because, look, when you're on the boundary, you can use the sideline to your advantage in coverage. Whereas when you're lining up at nickel, a receiver can go any direction on you. And when you have that quickness disadvantage, I think that's tough to overcome. So I think he can play both. I think we probably will see him play both. But I would put him primarily on the outside with Davonte Brown, go two long cornerbacks there on the outside and, make quarterbacks beat you with pinpoint accuracy deep.
And we've not talked about how we see this. So, Dave, just to be clear, you would go with those two as your primary guys on the outside, a corner?
Yeah, and I'd go Jaden Davis at nickel.
That's a little bit different than the way I see it. I do have Jadis. I'd like to see him on the outside as well. And when you're talking about kind of guarding the slot, to me, I think about some one-on-one stuff we see in the summer, either at the high school level, and you always see either big guys or certain slot guys. Essentially, when you do one-on-ones, you're kind of told, stay on your side of the field. When you go across the middle and you use the whole field, almost anybody running across the slot is going to catch that pass. And I think that's a little bit of what you're alluding to, just a little bit of a disadvantage with that. For me, I see it a little bit different. I would go Davonte Brown. I would start him at UCF, played a lot of football, started over 30 games in his career. I would start him. I'd start him over Richard, but I like those two big corners working it right there. And then on the other side, I would actually go to Corey Couch. I would start him on the outside. And I know that's a little bit different than you based on some conversations we've had, but I've had Couch over Porter there. If that's the battle that you're looking at, I like that. I just like versatility with players. I like the fact that you got a little bit more of a smaller corner with Couch, the bigger guy in Brown, and then you've got your guys backing them up that essentially are in the same skill set tree as the guys in front of them. And absolutely, I would start Jaden Davis in the slot, and I think that's going to be a really good fit for him with what he's able to do. I think he can guard the guys that he'll face there. So that's the way I would do it, and it has to do with some position versatility, the way guys look. I think to Corey Couch too, I think he's going to benefit with being on the outside a little bit more than just a nickel. I do think he's a better player than Daryl Porter. I think he showed it at the high school level. I think last year he played a lot more than Porter, even in different roles. I just think he's a better player, and I think he's going to win that job over Porter. If it's just straight up Couch over Porter, and then I got Brown over Richard, the way I'm looking at it.
Yeah, I'm curious, where would you draw the line for the rotation? And I'm not talking because I think maybe 6 guys will play some at corner, but the primary players, where would you draw the line at cornerback right now?
I asked that exact question to Lance Guidry at Media Day because I'm always fascinated about coach's philosophy when it comes to numbers at certain positions. And I'm just going to go with what he has to say. He said, usually you're looking at 3 corners. You're lucky if you can get 4. Now, I didn't ask him, does that include a guy like Jade? Does that include your slot guy? We're calling him Jaden a corner. but I think that's what you're looking at. I think you play, if we include those three starters, because they're going to play that base 4-2-5, you're going to see that on the field quite a bit, especially with the offenses that are going to face. I think one more corner, or if you need to relieve a guy, like I said, if Brown needs a relief, you get Richard in there. I just think you play those top guys the majority of routes. Maybe if a guy's going deep a lot and you're running some long routes, you got to sub a guy in. But I think the subs should be just if those other guys aren't performing. But I again, that's why for me it comes down to, I really like the bigger corner, the smaller corner, and then rotate just straight up like that. That's the way I would do it. So I would not play them that much unless you absolutely needed to. And I think, if you don't need to put them in there, you wouldn't. And I wouldn't go past those guys the way it looks right now, David. I don't see anyone else there at this time that should earn playing time. I definitely like when you keep things short. I know it's difficult to manage that with players because all players want to play. But if you need to, you put these other guys, let them be gunners on special teams, let them kind of handle those units, because corners, defensive backs, certainly linebackers, I always talk about them. Those guys are always key on special teams.
To me, it's a top three of the transfer newcomers. So I would go hard, top three, primarily, I don't know, 80% of the snaps at corner. I'd go Davonte on the outside, Jaden on the outside, Jaden Davis at nickel. My concerns with Corey is just, the size, and he is thicker. He does deserve credit. He continues year over year to add the necessary weight and strength. And also too, just with that size issue comes kind of the tackling on the edge issue. So those would be my concerns. And I think Jaden is a talented guy. I think, if we're talking about guys with NFL potential, there's a long way to go, but I think Jaden has much more of that than Corey. And I'll admit too, I am intrigued by Damari Brown. I think they want to throw him in the fire during some scrimmages here in fall camp and see how he responds. And then it's up to the performance factor with that. If he performs, he's going to push his way into the rotation. If not, then, like you're alluding to, special teams work for him. So I will say since the spring, especially, they have improved the cornerback depth in general. And this is why we're discussing this, right? They got all these options. And it's just a matter of piecing it all together, finding the right fits. And at the end of the day, that's a good thing. The top end talent probably isn't what it was last year. But I do think the depth and the options to find answers is improved.
One of the things that's interesting, looking at the cornerbacks again with what happened last year, again, you got two starting corners that were drafted by the NFL. Stevenson was a high pick, and then Ivy also picked. Cam Kitchen's All-American safety. James Williams, a very talented safety. You're looking at it like that. Why was Miami 10th in the ACC in passing yards giving up? They were 13th in pass efficiency defense, which always is usually a stat geared towards the secondary. They gave up a ton of big plays. So essentially what went wrong? And I think from a standpoint, David, if they do roll out, these guys are going to play. Like I said, I have a different roles on these guys, but these newcomers are going to play. You touched on Damari even trying to get in there, and he's a bigger corner. So for me, like I said, sticking with what I said before, I would slot him at the bigger corner spot, put him 3 behind Brown and Richard the way I have it. But can Miami? Why will Miami be better in the secondary after what happened last year, or will they, or will they kind of be much of the same? Again, you're losing talent, and they did have some talented players last year. So, are these guys those guys? I mean, how do you kind of see this? How do you view it? Or from Miami's fan point, from a fan standpoint, why would they be better?
I think it comes down to the communication. It's that aspect of secondary play that kind of has nothing to do with the physical traits. Last year's secondary had the physical traits, but they at times freelanced and didn't execute what the call was, and that can lead to disastrous results. So I do think that's been a point of emphasis since the end of last season. And look, can I promise that the results will be better? No, but they're definitely attacking that issue from last year. And, it was great. Like you look at some of the stats from last year, one that jumps out to me, I think they allowed like 10 plays of at least 50 yards through the air last year, which was the worst in the country. And that's, when you think about it too, that's almost like 1 per game. So once per game on average, They allowed a 50-yard pass. So I think the regression to the mean factor would tell you they'll be better in that regard. But again, I'm not saying the talent level is better at that starting group. I just think the depth and the competition, and maybe too, there's something to that with like when there's competition and depth that forces you to be more on point and pay attention to detail, snap to snap, game to game, et cetera, et cetera.
I think Jaden Davis is going to play a big part in the improvement. If they are going to improve, I think with him and the nickel, his experience, being able to do different things, I think just his leadership qualities, I think him being out there will really help. Like I said, I think with Couch, I think he could be better. I think he could be better than what we've seen once he's out on the outside. You touched on the stats with the 50 yards, worst in the country. Miami was last in the conference, giving up 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90-yard passes, all in the ACC. They were last in the conference. So big plays are going to be a big part for Miami to improve. Certainly when you give up those plays, it really adds to your totals and the efficiency numbers that I referred to. So it'll be fascinating to watch these guys moving forward in fall camp.